Okay, I think I'm live. What's up, everybody? Todd Keisling here. Just gonna give it a couple more minutes. I'm about a minute and a half early, I think. Please let me know in the chat if you have any trouble hearing me. Yeah, I see Amelia is here. Hi, Amelia. I miss you. So, I also have an unexpected visitor, and she's right here. This is Ophelia. Say hi, baby girl. So she's actually sprawled out on my desk right now. I wasn't expecting to have any cats in here, but anybody who lives with cats knows that, they do what they want. So, that was a tale. Okay, little girl. It's time to get off the desk. Come on. Come on. Oh, she doesn't like this. So I promise I'll be doing more than just showing off my cats. Go on. Go on. So thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate it very much. I know this is kind of a really, really weird time, right? I know a lot of authors have been doing these live readings and whatnot, and I wanted to, share some of my work with you guys, and also just try to, get out of my comfort zone a little bit, because I've been working from home for the last 2 weeks because of everything that's going on with the pandemic, and I'm going a little stir crazy. So, tonight I'm going to be reading from a few things, actually. So first off, I'm going to be reading from my new novella, SCANLINES, which came out earlier this month from Dim Shores. This is a very limited run. Only 150 copies of this were printed. I think there's a handful left. I could be wrong. It's about $12 if you're interested. They're all signed. They're all numbered. And just word of warning, this is a really dark story. So if that's not your thing, if you don't like dark horror, maybe pass this one up. I don't know. But that being said, limited run. I'll be reading a couple of scenes from this tonight. I'll also be reading a couple of scenes from my story Happy Pills, which appears in Arterial Bloom, edited by Mercedes M. Yardley. This is coming out in ebook on April 3rd, I believe, through Crystal Lake Publishing. And it's actually already out in print. I happen to have an ARC of this book because I also did the design work. So, it's a beautiful book if I do say so myself. But no, it turned out really nice. A lot of folks in here. Kelly Owens in here, John Bowden, Dino Parenti, Armand Rosamilia, Ken Liu, Linda D. Addison, who is an amazing human being, wrote the foreword. Jennifer Loring, Stephen Puri, Jonathan Cosgrove, Karina Bissett, Daniel Crow, Naching Tikasa, Christopher Barzak, Linda J. Marshall, Grant Longstaff, Jimmy Bernard. I don't think I missed anybody. I hope I didn't. Sorry if I did. So I'll be reading from my story there. This one's already available in print, and the ebook comes out next Friday. And this might be why some of you are here tonight. I am going to be reading a few scenes out of my forthcoming novel, Devil's Creek, which is out this summer on June 16th from Silver Shamrock Publishing. So, I'm really, really excited for you guys to read this. I know it's kind of been making the rounds in the reviewer circles. Everything seems to be really positive so far, so I hope it stays that way once the masses get their hands on it. It's a long book. It's about, I think the final draft ended up being 146,000 words. It's roughly 400 pages. Very long, small town, cosmic horror novel. A lot of characters, a lot of A lot of ins and outs, a lot of what have yous. Now, if you like straight up balls to the wall horror, this is your best bet. And this comes out in June. So, how's everybody doing? I see a bunch of people in the chat already. I hope you all are doing great. I got Amelia Bennett, who's my wonderful editor, Nikki Nelson Hicks, who's a fantastic author, Patrick Smith, we got Rich Duncan, Paul Limbaugh. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. Be sure to tell your friends and share the hell out of the link to this, because I suspect this is going to go for at least an hour. Oh, Brad Proctor showed up. Hi, Brad. Yeah. So, as you can tell, I get really nervous doing stuff like this, so I am going to take a drink, and then I'm going to start reading. I start off with SCANLINES. I don't know how long this will take me to read because I didn't practice. Let's see. Yeah, I'll be reading about 8 pages. So, what's wrong with Gatorade? Electrolytes. It's what the body craves. All right. So this is from SCANLINES. A bit of a primer on this. So SCANLINES is about a tape back in the late 90s, a tape of a suicide by a dead congressman. The story is based roughly on the suicide of Bud Dwyer. He was a politician in Pennsylvania who called a press conference back in the early 80s, I think, and shot himself on live TV. It's based on that. It's also based on myself and some friends that I had, when I was in school, in high school. And this actually ties in a little bit with Devil's Creek in a tiny way, because this takes place in the same town, just a different time period. So the setup is there are some flashback scenes interwoven with one of the friends writing a letter to Rob, who is the narrator. Basically a series of suicide notes. And just gonna, on that note, I am gonna say, trigger warning, this does deal heavily with suicide. So if that is a concern, by all means, please close this. Don't listen, because I get it. It's a tough subject. So at this point in the story, they have involved their friend Nell in helping to figure out what's happening to them. I should mention that after they accidentally download the video thinking it's porn, they watch this video of this guy killing himself on air. Afterwards, they're haunted by his face everywhere. So I know it's kind of a rambling synopsis. I probably should have just read the back of the book, but again, things like this make me nervous, so I'm just kind of talking. So, yeah, SCANLINES. Silence fell over us as Nell's intentions sank in. Jordan put his fork down and considered her words as he chewed his food. Danny wasn't as contemplative. You're serious? I am. Nell, even if that would work, what the hell would you hope to accomplish? I don't know, Danny. Do you have any better ideas? Fuck! She shouted that last word, earning the attention of our peers from the next table over. Keep it down, Jordan hissed. Shit, Nell, you want us all to get detention? She ignored him. I want to know why he's doing this, Danny. I want him to stop. I haven't had a good night's sleep in weeks. He's in my head. In my dreams, he's on my mom's face, he's on my TV, my computer. I can't do anything without him breathing down my goddamn neck, and I'm tired of it. Nell wiped her eyes with her sleeve. But he's all I can think about. I see that look in his eyes after he pulled the trigger. I've watched it so many times, guys. You can kind of see where the lights go out for him the second that bullet pierces his brain. Nell, Danny said. Please stop. And there's a moment where it's like his soul leaves his body and gets trapped in the screen. You've seen it. We've all seen it, and we didn't even know it. You have to slow the video down and go frame by frame. There's a shadow that leaves his head, gets tangled in the grain and scan lines. Looks like smoke, which is probably why no one noticed. Nell! Danny slammed his hand on the table so hard our trays rattled. The cafeteria fell silent, and the algebra teacher, Mrs. Johnson, stood up from the teacher's table. She walked to our side of the room and crossed her arms. There a problem over here, Mr. Chambers? Danny glared at Nell, who stared solemnly at her tray of half-eaten food. His cheeks flushed red, matched the color of his eyes. No, Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson looked at Nell. And you, Miss Simmons? Nell lifted her chin, opened her mouth to speak, and froze. I did the same. So did Danny and Jordan. Benjamin Hardy's dead face gazed down on us all. Grainy, monochromatic blood flickered and faded from his distorted face. His appearance took us all by surprise, and we took turns spouting a litany of expletives out of pure fright. Jordan shot out of his chair and backed against the wall. Nell tried to stand, caught her foot against the table leg, and fell backward. She landed hard on the tile with a sharp cry. I jumped from my seat and knelt beside Nell to see if she was okay. Danny remained at the table, frozen in fear as Mrs. Johnson's voice spoke from behind the dead man's bloody maw. What is wrong with you kids? You know better than to use that kind of language. Detention, all of you. The cafeteria murmured collectively, our peers watching as we collected ourselves and returned to our seats. We finished our meals in silence, and when the bell rang, Nell told us she'd meet us at Danny's house that evening. I don't remember much else about that day, except that detention was painfully boring. The dead man didn't make another appearance, at least not to me, and if my friends saw him, they never said. Two things stand out to me about the lunchroom incident. It was the first time I'd ever earned afternoon detention, and there were others who saw the man's face on Mrs. Johnson. I didn't realize it until much later when the damage was done. Whole tables of students stared at her, their expressions of fatigue and terror unmistakable. Some of them looked like they hadn't slept in days. Some of them looked like they'd seen a ghost. I admit Nell's plan was hokey. All we knew about Ouija boards was what Hollywood taught us. Want demons? Use a Ouija board and invite them into your life. Only bad things happen when a Ouija board is involved. You don't know who you're talking to with the board, you can't close the doors you open, and so on. Like I said, hokey. None of us were religious, at least not in the way our grandparents were. Aside from Jordan's born-again direction in recent years, we were all as agnostic as they come, especially given the time and the area in which we grew up. We were old enough that our parents couldn't force us to go to church, and none of us wanted to anyway. The people who picked on us every day, called us names, bullied us every year, were the ones who went to church. First Baptist in downtown Stafford was where all the hypocrites and sycophants went to jerk each other off on Sundays. Looking back, I'd like to think we were too smart for religion. At least, we believed we were. Our generation was too caught up in the moment, living day to day and minute to minute while riding this new exciting wave called the internet. Who has time to think about the afterlife when the latest mod for Quake 2 is available for download? Generation Y, millennials, whatever we weren't concerned about ancient doctrine or philosophy. Angels and devils were stories told to give us hope or scare us. All we wanted was to live, man. Enjoy our time while we could, come whatever may. Music was great, movies and games were great, and we couldn't wait to graduate and leave our shitty little town. The horrors of 9/11 hadn't happened yet, the economy hadn't collapsed, and a gallon of gas cost less than $1.10. The millennium was coming up. The threat of Y2K was real, and yet no one understood why. College was on the horizon, the gateway to our successful futures, and what an exciting time that promised to be. Who had time for ghosts and the words of dead men? Why worry about superstitious dangers? How many cracks have I stepped on without breaking Mom's back? I've lost count of how many black cats have crossed my path. I, grew up in a time when none of that mattered because tomorrow was a million years away. Even now, as my peers are back home living with their parents, unable to afford what society promised them 20 fucking years ago, we're all still living day to day, living in the moment. We have no time for superstition because, hey, I need to meet my hourly quota for the day, week, month, so I can pay my bills and continue surviving. So, yeah, when I think about what we did with the Ouija board that night, I can't help but feel indifferent to the implications. We were just trying to survive the day, while something we didn't understand slowly leached our will from us. We were 17 and stupid, with no concept of what we were dealing with. All we wanted was to live. Nell arrived at Danny's house around 8 that evening. Jordan smoothed things over with their parents, telling them we all had a group project for school, which wasn't a lie, not really. Benjamin Hardy was our morbid group project, just not for school. The stakes were much higher. We didn't dim the lights, and we didn't waste time with candles. No one had sage on hand to burn just in case, and we didn't pour salt in the doorways and on the window panes. It was just the four of us in the den, scattered on the carpet with an old Ouija board in front of us. The planchette was light and made of plastic. This is stupid. Danny wasn't wrong. I felt foolish even looking at the board and its arrangement of letters and numbers, yes and no in opposite corners, goodbye at the bottom. Nell placed the planchette in the center. Jordan looked at her, curious. You ever do this before? Once, she said. When I was a kid, me and my cousins tried it. Anything happen? Nell smirked. The lights went out. Scared the shit out of us. Turns out my mom tripped the breaker when she ran the blender. She was trying to make us milkshakes. I watched her place her fingers on the planchette. You don't think this will work? She looked at me, smiled. I don't know. I hope so. I didn't believe in ghosts until I watched the video. Did any of you? We shook our heads. Come on, Nell whispered. We all need to do this. Danny sighed, placed his fingers on the planchette. Jordan followed. I went last, resting my fingertips on the cheap piece of plastic. Nell closed her eyes, breathed deep, and mumbled something under her breath that sounded like, please. Then she raised her voice and said, Benjamin Hardy, we're calling out to you. We demand to know what you want from us. Silence. From upstairs, the muffled voice of a talking head on the news. Ron and Deborah Chambers talking about work. A slow drip from the bathroom faucet. Outside, wind blowing dead leaves across the driveway. My stomach gurgled. Jordan scratched his nose to hold back a sneeze. Danny shook his head, took his hand off the planchette. No, I'm sorry, but this is silly. It's Benjamin Hardy, she went on. You owe us an explanation. Answer us. Answer me. The planchette twitched beneath our fingers, and we gasped from the sensation. Nell hissed at Danny, told him to put his fingers back on the surface. He obeyed. What do you want from us? Slowly, the planchette inched across the board, charting a course between letters. O, T, H, E, R, S. Are you doing this, D? Jordan cracked a smile, expecting his brother to admit to the joke, but Danny wasn't laughing. None of us were. The planchette moved on its own. Only Nell was fearless, or desperate enough to continue the conversation. The rest of us would have stopped there if we could. Is this Benjamin Hardy? The planchette slid to the corner. No. Who are you? I, A, M, Y, O, U. We looked at each other, confused. Nell asked again, Is this Benjamin Hardy? The planchette didn't move. I suggested she ask a different question, but Nell shook her head. Who are we speaking to? Y, O, U, R, F, A, C, E, I, S, M, Y-F-A-C-E. Answer me, goddammit! Nell, Danny said softly. He put his hand on her shoulder. This isn't going anywhere. Calm down. She slapped his hand away, her weary eyes poised on the board. Jordan and I removed our hands from the planchette and moved away to give her space. Danny appealed to her once more. Nell, please. I have to stop it, Danny. Don't you understand that? She looked at me and Jordan. Don't any of you understand that? Do you see what it's doing to me? To us? Nell was trapped in a web of desperation. A web of her own making. A web we would all spin for ourselves sooner or later. She wiped her eyes and continued. What do you want from me, Benjamin? O-T-H-E-R-S. I don't understand. What others? She looked at each of us. The guys? Danny and Jordan and Robbie? The planchette moved to the corner of the board. No. Once the planchette settled on its answer, it shot off the board with the force of a hockey puck and struck the far wall. From behind us came the familiar warbling noise of a degaussing screen. I turned and watched the computer monitor flicker to life. A desktop wallpaper of Jenny McCarthy came into focus, but her features were wrong. She was bloated, her skin graying and peeling like old paint, and her face sagged until her gums and eye sockets were exposed. Blood oozed from her nostrils and elongated mouth. I cleared my throat. Guys? We watched in shocked silence as the image deteriorated in real time, Jenny McCarthy's once slender features bloating and slowly decomposing into digital noise. Benjamin Hardy's face emerged from a pool of black static. A single word hissed from the computer speakers. Others. The voice was unmistakable, even with the distortion and gurgling interference of air through liquid. Hardy's voice came through loud and clear. Someone turn it off, Jordan said. He looked to his brother. Turn it off, D. Danny was halfway across the room when something popped inside the computer case, and the screen went dark. A thin stream of smoke rose from the corner of the disk drive. Both brothers scrambled to their computer, panicking over the apparent hardware failure, and I remember turning to Nell to gauge her reaction. She sat with her knees drawn up to her chin. Tears welled in her eyes. I called her name, and when she looked up at me, I lost the words of reassurance. Nothing I could say would have alleviated the utter loss in her eyes. In the weeks following everything that went down at Brandon's house, authorities ruled there was no planning involved. The event was spontaneous, with one person's actions fueling the next. Not entirely dissimilar from the so-called Werther effect, but on a much smaller and immediate scale. I think Nell knew what she was going to do before she did it. Thinking back, recalling that look in her eye, I've no doubt about that. She knew. And that's a portion of SCANLINES, which is available now from Dim Shores. So, what do you guys think? Yes? No? Too dramatic? Let's see here. We got some chat going on. Hey, John. Thank you for telling everybody to buy the book. I appreciate it. Got Rich. What's up, Rich? How you doing, man? Rich from Ink Heist, everybody. Let's see. Is that a Chad Lutsky? Oh, shit. What's up, man? How you doing? Thanks for joining me tonight. Kenlin, hi. How are you? Paula plugged her ears. I understand. It's okay. I look forward to hearing what you think, Paula. Oh, crap. I even had a fancy overlay for that reading, and I didn't turn it on. There you go. That's what you were supposed to see. Yeah, I guess it is a bit of a party, isn't it? Looks like I've got 15 people watching currently, which is pretty cool. Alright, so I am gonna get started on reading Happy Pills. Eric W. What's up, Eric? So I'm gonna get started on reading Happy Pills, and I'm not gonna read the whole story, even though it's a short one. Again, this is appearing in Arterial Bloom. This goes on sale on April 3rd. Paperback's currently available already, though I don't know when Amazon is shipping it out because of everything that's going on. You know, essential versus non-essential. I mean, it's got my story in it, so obviously it must be pretty fucking essential. I mean, come on. Alright, primer about Happy Pills. I'm okay, I promise. Let's see. I wrote this in late 2018. I had a pretty rough year 2018. I've been dealing with some severe depression and anxiety issues. And this, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong because my memory's slipping in my old age, this story was my first story that I'd written after coming out of that. So this one is pretty personal, hits pretty close to home, and it's about a guy who's had struggled so much with depression that he resorts to an experimental antidepressant medication. Hilarity ensues. So I'm just gonna read the beginning of this. This is Happy Pills. Marcus Taylor had a name for the nothingness inside. There were other words for it: melancholia, ennui, depression, but absence describes exactly what it was to him. A paradoxical emptiness embodying the essence of himself. A black hole tugging at every moment of his life, forcing his personality inside out. And after 30 plus years of fighting against the pull of its gravity, Marcus was starting to lose his footing. It's not that I've given up, he said to his psychiatrist. It's that I just don't care if I succeed or fail. There's nothing there to make me feel a sense of pride or responsibility, no sense of urgency or repercussion. Like, I've resigned myself to my fate, if that makes sense. He shrugged. Whatever happens, happens. Dr. Wilson looked down at her notes, scribbled something in Marcus's file. Like a leaf in the wind. Marcus nodded. Something like that. I suppose this laissez-faire attitude hasn't gone over well with your manager? It hasn't. That's why I asked him to move up my appointment to today. Did something happen today at work? Yes. No, I mean, sort of. She clasped her hands together, placed them on her lap, and smiled. Do you want to talk about it? No, Marcus wanted to say. I really don't. Instead, he recounted the meeting that morning, flushing with embarrassment all over again. How did that make you feel? On the surface? Like garbage. When my manager said I made the rest of the department uncomfortable, I wanted to scream. He questioned my reliability, brought up Kathy and our separation, said he needed someone who could be happy, who could smile, said he was putting me on notice, and I sat there and took it. He trailed off, replaying his manager's words in his mind. You come into the office late. When you do show up, you're a mess, like you haven't showered or slept in days. You're irritable with your coworkers. When I try to talk to you about it, you look right through me, like you're doing now. His manager's words faded into the background, lost among a tumult of white noise and a constant barrage of dark thoughts. Loser. Failure. No one wants you. You can't do anything right. And below the surface? Marcus returned to the present and sighed. Aside from the usual feeling of worthlessness and failure, nothing at all, less than nothing. frustrated and stuck. It's hard to explain to someone that you're incapable of feeling happiness or anger or anything else for that matter. How do you explain to someone that the act of smiling is like lifting the heaviest weight on the planet? I just can't. How did it make you feel when he brought up your wife? I wanted to feel angry. I wanted to respond with indignation like anyone else would, even if he was right. But I didn't. I didn't say anything. No feelings. No words. Empty inside. The absence. Marcus nodded. Yeah, the absence. You'd think all that nothing inside would add up to something. He looked away, chewing idly on his thumbnail. Is there maybe another medication I can try? It's been a month since the dosage increased, and I just don't feel any different. Like, no different at all. Dr. Wilson frowned. She spun her chair around, tapped a few keys on her laptop. You've made progress, Marcus. Don't think you haven't, but we've tried every SSRI and NDRI available. We've maxed out the dosage on each one, including your current prescription. She turned back and offered him an apologetic smile. Okay, so what's that mean? I'm a lost cause? This is as good as it gets? No, it means we try a different combination of medications. What works for one doesn't always work for another, and it can require some experimentation to see what's most effective. There's no magic bullet. She paused, considering her words before speaking, and closed her mouth. Instead, she returned to her laptop and opened her email client. Actually, I might have something for you. Marcus chewed his lip while drumming his fingers. His fingernails were chewed down to the quick, the soft flesh swollen and caked in dried blood. How long had he suffered from these nervous tics? He couldn't remember. Maybe his whole life. Every second of every day raced through his mind at light speed, every possibility and scenario crashing head first into one another on repeat, over and over and over again. Dr. Wilson's face fell when she looked away from her laptop. Are you okay? Yeah, he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I'm fine. The lie was out of his mouth before he could stop it. Do you have something for me to try? She reached for a sheet of paper on her printer tray, glanced over the contents on the page. I might, she said. How would you feel about participating in a clinical trial? A week later, Marcus checked in at a doctor's office across town. The act of going somewhere different, seeing someone entirely new and being honest about his ailments shifted Marcus's anxiety into overdrive, but he didn't have a choice. Dr. Patel was the only doctor in the region administering a clinical trial. If he wanted a shot at this, this was it. He waited half an hour before they called him back to an exam room. A few minutes later, a short man with glasses and a lab coat entered the room. He held a thick folder in one hand. The words ZZ Initiative, Confidential, were printed on the back. Mr. Taylor, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Patel. You're here for the endoxamine trial, yes? Endoxamine? Dr. Patel flipped through his chart, noted Marcus's name, and smiled. Yes, endoxamine zytocycline 44. There isn't a sexy, marketable name for it yet, but just between you and me, he took a seat and swiped his badge at the computer terminal. I hear they're thinking of calling it Euphoria, but you didn't hear that from me. Marcus feigned interest with a nod. Smiling was out of the question. Too much effort. Anyway, I just need to record some vitals first. Do you have any questions for me before we jump into the trial? Marcus tore off a bit of his thumbnail and chewed on it. How many of these trials have you administered? This will be my third. Endoxamine 35 and 39, previously. Hold out your arm for me, please. Gonna take your blood pressure. And, how effective were they? Did they help? Dr. Patel smiled, pumping air into the sleeve around Marcus's arm. I'm afraid I'm bound by a non-disclosure agreement and can't reveal details of prior trials. Marcus nodded, rolling that response around in his head while the doctor tended to his pulse and temperature. Non-disclosure agreement? Maybe he meant doctor-patient confidentiality? Right. Everything looks acceptable. The doctor retrieved the plump folder and extracted a series of documents. You'll need to sign these before I can formally release the prescription to you. Consent forms, mostly, authorizing the release of his medical records to the pharmaceutical company conducting the trials. A non-disclosure agreement concerning the trial itself. He looked up at the doctor and tried to smile. They're big on privacy, aren't they? Oh, yes, Dr. Patel said. It's all proprietary chemistry, and they're particular about how it's conducted. When the trial is over, they'll want everything back too. The orientation pamphlets, the pill bottle, residue samples, everything. Residue? Dr. Patel smiled impatiently. I'll explain in just a moment, Mr. Taylor. Marcus returned to the documents, scribbling his name on each form and fighting off the slow-motion panic building within. He'd broken a sweat by the time he was done. Dr. Patel looked them over, initialing and dating where required, and set them aside. I'll have my staff provide you with copies of these on your way out. Now for the fun stuff. The doctor spent the next 15 minutes speaking in jargon, explaining the chemical composition and how it was expected to interact with Marcus's brain chemistry. Marcus understood some of the terminology, serotonin, and norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitors. That's a mouthful. The rest was lost on him, and he found himself nodding every time the doctor paused to move the conversation forward. Just want the pill, Doc. Don't care how it works, so long as it works. But would it work? That question wedged itself into his brain like a splinter and would not come out. He told himself to hope for the best, but the anxiety whispered the same question repeatedly, feeding the absence inside him. Would it work? Probably not, and if it doesn't, oh well, it doesn't matter. Just like you. What sets this medication apart from the other SSRIs and NDRIs on the market is that it works fast. Marcus returned to the conversation, his mouth dry, his forehead dotted in sweat. How fast? You should see a difference in less than 12 hours from the time you take your dose. 12 hours? Holy shit. Dr. Patel grinned. Uh-huh. It's powerful stuff. There have to be some serious side effects, though. I mean, something that strong. Well, Mr. Taylor, that's the purpose of this trial, to determine any major side effects. Considering the chemistry involved, I'd say you can expect for it to make you feel a little weird at first. Drowsiness, maybe some abnormal mood swings, and so on. And like any other similar medication, should you begin to experience suicidal thoughts, you're to call me immediately, night or day. My number is in your packet. Understood. Would you say it's a good idea to take this before I sleep? Absolutely. It's a requirement of the study. Dr. Patel paused, glanced at Marcus's wedding band. You may want to consider isolating yourself from any loved ones. The process can be somewhat unpleasant to witness. Unpleasant how? I'm afraid I can't disclose. Right, Marcus sighed. The non-disclosure agreement. Got it. My wife and I are separated, so... He trailed off as the familiar heat of embarrassment choked his words. Please don't say anything. Please don't make me lie to you. Good, Dr. Patel said, forcing a smile. Very good. He clasped his hands, startling Marcus from his anxious stupor, and climbed to his feet. I think that covers everything. Good luck to you, Mr. Taylor. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised when you wake up tomorrow. When they finished, Marcus collected his packet of orientation materials at the front desk. Among them was a pamphlet labeled Endoxamine Cytocycline Trial Number 44, Read Before Dosage, and the Holy Grail itself, a clear prescription bottle containing a single black pill. The receptionist smiled and handed him his appointment card. We will call you in the morning to check on you, Mr. Taylor. Thanks, he said, and gathered his things. He tried to smile again, but the weight was still there, and all he managed was a sneer. He hurried out of the office before his embarrassment got the better of him. When he reached his car, Marcus looked back at the office complex, puzzled. Residue samples, he thought. He never explained that. Marcus considered returning to ask, but the anxiety crashing against his resolve decided otherwise. And if you want to find out what happens next, order Arterial Bloom from Crystal Lake Publishing, out now in print. An ebook hits Amazon on the 3rd. Yeah. So, just on a personal note, I know that Mercedes Yardley is a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, and I know she worked her butt off on this and went through way more than any sane person would ever have to go through to make an anthology happen. So it would be a big, I don't know, a big positive thing in her life if you guys pick this up and let her know what you think after you read it. So, I'm looking at the chat now. Let's see. Oh, Amazon says Arterial Bloom will ship in 1 to 2 days. That's great. Rich, thank you for buying SCANLINES. I appreciate that. All right. Yeah, Chad's in the know. He knows what Mercedes went through to make this book happen. So let's all support her and say hi, Mercedes, in the chat. Everybody say hi. Hi, Mercedes. So, Devil's Creek. That's what I got left. I've got 2 passages marked. Unlike SCANLINES, this is what I should have done, I am actually going to read the back cover copy of the book so people actually know what the hell is going on. Thanks, Justin. Justin Holly says, I possess a storyteller's voice. Oh, I appreciate that. So, Devil's Creek. Give us that old-time religion. Side note, the book reviewer Well-Read Beard, he did a fantastic quick musical rendition of the song Old Time. Give Me That Old Time Religion. And you guys should check it out. It's on his Twitter feed. You'll have to dig for it. It was about a month or so ago. Hey Neva. Kendall Kelly said I should do audiobooks. Yeah, I've considered it. Unfortunately, I don't have a proper space and to record in. I would need to actually make a proper booth, a recording booth, and that's more time and expense than I really want to go to make that happen. Also, any time I spend doing something, like an audiobook is time I'm not writing. So I'll leave it to the professionals who have far better voices than I do, and provided that things work out with a potential narrator that I've requested, there will be an audio version of Devil's Creek. I don't know when. I do know that things are moving. That's all I can say. So, about 15 miles west of Stafford, Kentucky, lies Devil's Creek. According to local legend, there used to be a church out there, home to the Lord's Church of Holy Voices, a death cult where Jacob Masters preached the gospel of a nameless God. And like most legends, there's truth buried among the roots and bones. In 1983, the church burned down following a mass suicide. Among the survivors were Jacob's 6 children and their grandparents, who banded together. I can't read this because Amazon puts this stupid-ass band across the... You see that? Isn't that ugly? This is what they do for advanced reader copies. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. In 1983, the church burned down following a mass suicide. Among the survivors were Jacob's 6 children and their grandparents, who banded together to defy their former minister. Dubbed the Stafford Six, these children grew up amid scrutiny and ridicule, but their infamy has faded over the last 30 years. Now their ordeal is all but forgotten, and Jacob Masters is nothing more than a scary story told around campfires. For Jack Tremley, one of the 6, memories of that fateful night have fueled a successful art career and a lifetime of nightmares. When his grandmother Imogene dies, Jack returns to Stafford to settle her estate. What he finds waiting for him are secrets Imogene kept in his youth. Secrets about his father and the church. Secrets that can no longer stay buried. The roots of Jacob's buried God run deep, and within the heart of Devil's Creek, something is beginning to stir. As I said before, hey, Laurel Hightower has joined us. Thank you, Laurel. Hi. Go check out her book. I'm sorry I can't remember the title of it, but it's through Journal Stone. Laurel, tell everybody in the chat what the name of your book is so they can go buy it. Sorry. So, with Devil's Creek, again, a lot of characters. There were 6 main characters dealing with the survivors, the Stafford 6, and it takes place in current day. You kind of get to see how they've grown up living with this awful past and how they've been treated by the town and everything. They're as good as Laurel's. They're not better. Laurel said, just buy Todd's books, they're better. So, basically, all the main characters have kind of gone their separate ways. Jack, of course, the main character, he's a successful artist. Chuck grows up to become an attorney, a probate attorney. Stephanie is a radio DJ. My God, I'm forgetting their names now. Bobby is a minister. He grows up to be a minister for First Baptist, which was referenced in SCANLINES just a little while ago. Gosh, what's her name? Susan. Susan she's kind of the black sheep of the group. She kind of stayed around town, taking odd jobs, doing her thing, shacking up with the local sheriff, or chief of police, I should say. And then there's Zeke. Zeke is the guy whose scene I'm going to be reading about. Zeke had a rough go of things, and he's a bit of a dope fiend. He didn't really amount to anything. He's kind of resorted to drug dealing in and around the area with his pal Waylon. And in this scene, he has gone off with his partner Waylon to cook up some meth for the chief of police, Bell, who also dabbles in, well, taking kickbacks from their drug deals. So they've happened to choose the place of the death cult's, commune, the remains of the commune out in the forest near Devil's Creek, as a quiet, isolated place to cook. So I'm gonna read this scene. It's a few pages long. Zeke regretted not stopping his friend at the footbridge. He doubted Waylon's ignorance, of course, but Zeke was a grown man, and the monster haunting his dreams was long dead. The last thing he wanted was to look like a pussy in front of his friend. Besides, what harm would there be in them camping at the old compound? So what if they spent a couple days in the woods near the site of a grisly mass suicide? All the shit that happened when he was a kid was probably a spate of nightmares anyway. There might have been some truth at the heart of them, but a child's imagination is a wild and feral thing, capable of dragging an innocent truth off into the dark to be devoured. These lies failed to abate the constant chill crawling over his skin as they hiked into the abandoned village. Even while they were setting up the cook site in one of the shacks, even while sweat rolled down his neck, his back, into the crack of his ass, the chill ran deep into his marrow. Twice he stopped because of an uncontrollable shiver. If it were any other day, in any other place, he would have thought himself ill. "You're terrified, boy. Just like when you used to wake up in the night, soaked through to the bone with sweat, screaming the pastor was coming to get you, to feed you to his God. His God was hungry, always seeking you out in the dark, crawling towards you, trying to taste you with its many tongues, trying to tear into you with its many teeth." Zeke shook off the voice of his grandfather, gathered his wits, and focused on the work at hand. He and Waylon followed the instructions he'd found online, working by way of flashlight when they lost the sun, and even with his mind elsewhere, the persistent shivers wouldn't cease. Once everything was set up, Waylon suggested they take a break before switching on the burner. "Give me the flashlight," he said. "I need to go take a leak." Zeke hesitated before handing over the light. Cold spike bisected his gut, filling him with the sort of dread that made his bowels clench, his testicles shrivel. "Don't go far," he said, and instantly felt foolish. Waylon raised the light to his face and stuck out his tongue. "Thanks, Dad. I'll try to watch out for the boogeyman." Zeke gave a light-hearted chuckle, but the dread grew colder when Waylon left the shack, leaving him to sit alone in the dark on an old folding chair. A minute later, he heard Waylon cursing about flies as he wandered deeper into the village. And then he was alone except for the drone of nocturnal insects in the distance, the hushed sigh of leaves rustling in a low breeze. He waited for his eyes to adjust to the darkness, following the outline of the crude, rotting door hanging limp from one wall of the shack. The floor was dirt and leaves, and when the breeze blew harder, he smelled the musty odor of an animal's droppings somewhere nearby. An old mattress sat in the far corner of the shack, covered in dark stains and reeking of mildew. Zeke wondered how the hell anyone could have lived out here in the woods without running water or electricity. Sure, people had done it for thousands of years, but only because they didn't have a choice. The moment man had light on command and fresh water to wash his ass whenever he wanted was a true turning point in civilization. Yes, sir. Yet we lived out here for years. Mama, you were out of your goddamn mind. What little Zeke remembered of his mother was encompassed in shadowy vignettes, burned to a crisp at the edges, the pictures faded with time. She beat him so much he thought she hated him, despite being told the contrary. "You're special," she always told him. "You're one of the Lord's chosen." He didn't feel chosen for anything. His life was a gag reel of colossal fuck-ups, one quiet tragedy after another. The other kids who'd survived, the rest of the Stafford Six, they'd all moved on to make something of themselves, but not Zeke. Instead of being out in the town with a girl or sitting at home with a family, here he was, squatting in a run-down shack in the middle of nowhere, waiting to cook a batch of impure methamphetamine. If he was supposed to do important things, he'd miss the bus by a few hours at least. One of the Lord's chosen, he thought. Fuck off. How ignorant could all those people have been? He barely remembered their faces, but he did remember their utter devotion, their happiness and bliss whenever his father spoke before the crowd. He wondered how so many could give up so much based on the word of a mortal man. Ah, but Ezekiel, he wasn't just any man. He was your daddy. He was your savior. He was the word, the voice, the hand of our Lord. He was. He is. There'll come a reckoning one day soon, oh yes, because your daddy ain't done with his business. He's digging his way up from hell right now, and like the savior of the heretics, he's coming home to set his people free. His mind wandered into the dark, and his imagination had its way with him again. Being alone in this ghost town unsettled him, put him on edge like he'd never felt before. He felt like a trespasser in a graveyard. The folks who pulled up stakes, sold all their belongings, and given it to his father's church for the sake of building a utopia in the forest all died here. Their spirits would roam here for the rest of eternity, walking hand in hand, replaying the final moments of their lives. "Stop it," he said, ignoring the chattering of his teeth. "You're scaring yourself." Maybe it was the dark. Maybe it was the empty village of the dead. Maybe it was the fact his friend hadn't come back. Oh, shit. Zeke stood and crept to the edge of the doorway. He peered out. Moonlight filtered through the trees, illuminating a path through the remains of the holy compound. "Waylon?" The forest rustled and breathed around him. He cleared his throat and spoke louder. "Waylon, stop fucking around, man." The forest said nothing, and neither did his friend. Another chill swept over him, racking his body with the shivers for a full minute until he got a grip on himself. "This is stupid," he thought. "You're freaking yourself out for nothing. That dipshit is out there laughing his ass off at you. He knew all along what this place meant to you, and he brought you here just to fuck with you. And it's working, he mumbled. The forest absorbed his voice, masking it with the primitive sounds of nature, of crickets and rodents in the brush and brambles, of rustling leaves in a wind far too cold for this time of year. He called out to Waylon again and waited, listening to his heart thud heavily in his chest. 1,000. 2,000. 3,000. 4,000. A guttural scream tore through the night, shredding any hope of this being a joke. Heart racing, his legs like jelly, Zeke scrambled out of the shack and into the fractured moonlight. He called to Waylon once more, but his friend was silent. The forest swallowed his cries as easily as it swallowed his mind, projecting phantoms through the undergrowth, shadow puppets in the dim glow of the moon. Everything moved around him, driven by the wind, and the constant hiss of rustling leaves filled his head with serpents. Confused, his heart in the grip of an icy terror he'd not felt since he was a child, Zeke Billings pumped his legs and forced himself forward into the dark. He followed the dim outline of a trail through the center of the village, past a dozen overgrown structures, their slipshod windows filled with the faces of the dead. He saw them from the corner of his eye as he ran, and he told himself they weren't there. They were tricks of the moonlight, broken by the limbs and leaves and reassembled by his feral imagination. His drive to find Waylon was fueled by a desire to leave this place, to leave its silent memory of servitude and damnation behind forever, cast back into the darkened halls of his nightmares. So he ran. He ran until a phantom fist clenched at his ribs, tugging with each step he took. He ran until his heart pumped steam and his lungs burst with fire. Tears streamed down his face as he shot forward to the clearing ahead, each step more laborious than the last, and when his feet caught the rotted husk of a fallen log, he welcomed the sweet collapse. The hard, musty earth and soft grass of an open field met his face. Zeke pushed himself from the ground and rose to his knees. He wiped his eyes, and when his vision finally cleared, his heart sank deep into his gut. No, not here, anywhere but here. Calvary Hill rose in the center of the clearing, the old stony pathway up its face overgrown with weeds. The church was long gone, of course, burned to cinders and ash decades before, but its ghost remained in the window of his imagination. A full moon hung overhead, aligned perfectly over the hill like the unblinking eye of God. Susan's words filled his head, a memory from earlier when the world still made some semblance of sense to him. It's a full moon tonight. Zeke stood on his knees, staring up at the silent monument of his childhood, watching incredulously as the earth breathed in the moonlight glow. He was so enraptured by the sight, he didn't register movement from the corner of his eye. There were sucking sounds coming from behind him, slurping, cracking, crunching sounds. A spike of fear wedged itself into his belly, filling him with a numbing cold, leaching his last ounce of resolve. Slowly, Zeke turned his head toward the sounds, his heart shooting back into high gear when he saw the hulking shadow leaning over the dead log. The shadow moved, allowing the moonlight to wash over the log, and Zeke froze in horror. Waylon lay sprawled on the grass, one leg twisted back at an impossible angle, his glassy eyes locked on the indifferent sky above, and a grotesque sneer of agony frozen to his face. His shirt was ripped open, his chest nothing more than a cavity of exposed meat and gore. A light tendril of steam rose from the warmth of his entrails. "Oh God!" Zeke mumbled. The shadow reached into the hole of Waylon's chest, snapped off one of his ribs, and began sucking on the marrow. It raised its head and turned toward him, revealing a face coated in mud and blood. Worms writhed through the thing's greasy hair, feeling their way along the curve of its forehead and around the dried O of an old gunshot wound. The shadow crunched down on Waylon's broken rib and cast its gaze upon him. Its eyes glowed, two sapphire orbs floating in the dark. Zeke Billings met the living face of his nightmare and began to scream. Jacob Master flashed a grim smile. "My little lamb," he rasped. That's the end of that scene. This is the most I've talked in like 3 weeks. What do you guys think? Hey, Tony's here. Candy Corn Apocalypse. Thanks for tuning in, brother. Oh, wow. We need to convince Todd to do more of these. Okay. When I have more to read, sure. John, you absolutely should read it again. You totally should. Just read it. In fact, just get rid of all your other books and just read this book over and over again. You know, it's funny because I see Amelia, talking about, when she was editing it and everything. And honestly, I have this writer's curse, I guess, of self-deprecation, where I think everything I write, people are going to hate. And this was so different than everything else I'd written. Like, I kind of feel like this is almost like a master's thesis on horror, I guess. Like, this was a kind of like a melting pot of everything I knew about horror and just kind of threw it all together. And it was so different from my other stuff, I guess, that had come before. Like, I guess my novella, The Final Reconciliation, which also ties into this, was kind of like a first step toward this. And I don't know. It's like I saw John Lynch compare it to the Salem's Lot, and I think that's awesome because I reread Salem's Lot before I really dove into this book. Salem's Lot's one of my all-time favorite King novels, and I feel like he's done the small town dynamic so many times, but I feel like with Salem's Lot, it was at its most pure because he was doing it for the first time, And it's just the right length. It doesn't overstay its welcome, even though you are in this town and learning about its various characters. And I mean, I took that stance with Devil's Creek, and I mean, I hope I get to do like an author's definitive edition someday with this, because there's about 100 pages that got cut from the original draft. There was a lot more happenings in town, a lot more periphery characters that didn't really serve a major purpose. So I understand why they were cut, but at the same time they kind of filled out the town as a living, breathing character, and that was my goal. So yeah, I cut as much of it as I was willing to cut without rewriting the whole thing, much to my agent's chagrin, I think. So yeah, I kind of talk in circles about this because I've lived in this book for like 3 years now. I guess I started writing it in May of 2017, but really there were many false starts. There were many false starts along the way over a period of about 12 years before I finally had enough of an idea of it in my head to really formulate it. Yeah, as Amelia says in the chat, there was one upsetting scene in an old folks' home that I had to cut, and that was a good example of killing a darling because I really wanted to keep it. Let's just say that there might have been an orgy happening at the old folks' home. It was very Bentley Little. I wanted to keep that, but with some of the changes I made after other subsequent cuts, there was no need to keep it. So maybe someday it will see the light of day. So I have another scene to read, and I'm just going to warn you guys ahead of time, it ends abruptly because it's a dream sequence. And those of you who listen to the Ink Heist podcast with Shane Douglas Keene, Rich Duncan, and Laurel Hightower, I talked a bit about this. I don't remember if it was the last time I was on or the first time, like a month or so ago. I think it was the first time, maybe. But there's this dream sequence that happens in this book. I really had that dream. It occurred repeatedly throughout my years in college, involving myself and my great-grandmother, and honestly kind of was one of the seeds that later grew into what became Devil's Creek. So this scene, this, aside from names and some things to suit the story, like it happening at Devil's Creek in the scheme of the book, most of this scene is how my dream played out. So I'm just going to read this for you so you can share my dread. Jack Tremley read until dawn, wading through the many notes and newspaper clippings stuffed inside the notebook's pages, until his eyelids hung heavy in the gray morning light. He felt drunk with knowledge, his mind tilted askew by the burden of weight his late grandmother set upon his shoulders, the room shifting in a haze of a hangover tinged with understanding and terror. The confusing puzzle in his grandmother's notebook set his spirit alight, and despite the thoughts racing through his head, sleep found him. Sleep always found him. And so did the things waiting in the dark. The nightmare is always the same. He is well acquainted with its twists and turns, the vividness of its depiction, the sensory effects hyper-real in the dream space. Sunlight beaming through the passenger window of his grandmother's green Cadillac heats his arm to an uncomfortable degree, so much the skin reddens in the morning light. Summers in Stafford are always sweltering, a haven for flies and mosquitoes, the trees drooping in depression. Outside, a forest passes them by in a swirling green haze, and the floor beneath his tiny feet rattle from gravel kicking and spitting up in the wheel well. He can't remember his age, but guesses he's somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. He's dressed in dark leather sandals, neatly pressed khakis, and a green checkered button-down. Without looking, he knows his hair is slicked back and parted to the side. Mama Jeannie drives in silence, leading them along a forest path in the morning sun. Her hair is pristine, a silvery dome coiffed and immaculately sculpted into a perfect bouffant by the finest artists at Arlene's beauty shop. She wears her favorite earrings, a pair of dangling butterflies adorned with emerald jewels. A gift from her late husband, Jack remembers, although he can't recall his grandfather's face. He died in a car accident when Jack was a baby. The nightmare shifts here, a rapid jump cut to a different scene, one projector switched out for another. Mama Jeannie holds his hand and leads him into the forest. The path is overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. Stones older than time lay embedded in the earth, covered in patches of moss and etched with crude symbols. Deeper into the forest, the world is a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, the sun filtering through the trees in a shadow box display. Mama Jeannie leads him down a small slope into a gully overgrown with ferns and dandelions. A creek slices through the gully in an erratic line, its waters babbling over stones and under deadfalls. Birds chirp overhead, and the trees whisper about this pair of visitors wandering beneath their branches. Jack stops at the wooden footbridge and tugs on his grandmother's hand. "Why do they call it Devil's Creek, Mamaw?" This is the only detail of his nightmare that changes. Imogene Tremley turns to him, and sometimes she's smiling, sometimes she's laughing, sometimes she's crying. Sometimes, like this time, she doesn't have an expression, her lips a single thin line across her face. "The water's split up ahead," she says, pointing out toward the forest, which now seems so dense it's like a thick green curtain draped over the world. They split off like the Devil's Pitchfork, so old-timers called it Devil's Creek. But we both know there ain't no devil. Ain't that right, honey? No, ma'am. They continue deeper into the forest, where a village of shacks is being constructed. Tools and supplies strewn about the foliage, hammers and saws and nails and beams of lumber and sheet metal, a town grown from the old stones of the earth beneath them. The village smells of rotted meat, and Jack understands why as they near the clearing. Animal carcasses hang from the limbs of trees at the foot of the clearing, odd sacrifices lifted to the sky, an offering to gods Jack can't pronounce with his elementary tongue. Flies swarm around the rotting limbs in thick black clouds, and Jack's stomach churns as the stench hits him. He vomits a breakfast of milk and cereal all over his shoes, and Mama Jeannie scolds him for getting his clothes dirty on their way to church. Another shift in scene, another projector reel swapped out, and they're at the summit of Calvary Hill. The Lord's Church of Holy Voices stands before them, and the lilting sound of the choir seeps through the old white beams. Mama Jeannie runs her fingers through Jack's hair until she is satisfied with how it looks. She takes his hand once more. "Now," she says, "be quiet. We're late for the invocation." She opens the door and leads him into the single room of the old church. The pews are shoved back against the perimeter walls, and motes of dust dance in the beams of morning light piercing through the windows. Straight ahead, the lectern lies on its side, and the upright piano sits against the wall, forever out of tune. The room is vacant except for the sounds of the humming choir rising from a hole in the floor. Mama Jeannie leads Jack to the edge of the hole where they peer into the depths. There's light down there. Flickering orange flames fill the cavern with shadows, and Jack resists his grandmother's pull. "We're late," she whispers, and releases his hand to descend the ladder before them. He watches her, helpless as she sinks into the shadows, and in a moment of terror, Jack considers fleeing for the door. "Jackie," his grandmother whispers, "are you coming?" His cheeks flush with shame. He doesn't want to let her down, doesn't want to earn her scorn, and descends into the dark. The reel changes again, and they're in an open cavern far below the foundation of the church. Dome-like, insulated in the depths of Calvary Hill, the cavern walls are lined with cracked stone plates upon which are carved symbols that hurt Jack's eyes when he looks at them. A pillar of earth rises from one end, circled with steps carved from stone. The center of the cavern is lit with torches positioned around the perimeter, illuminating mounds of dust and bones. In the infinite wisdom of dream logic, Jack knows there are countless bones buried beneath their feet if they would only dig a little further, and he scrapes the heel of his foot in the dirt. A gray jawbone protrudes from the dirt, its baby teeth caked in dark soil and worms. "Hello," it says. "Won't you join me?" Jack turns away, frightened by the sight, but he finds no respite here in the cavern. The members of his grandmother's church sit in the center, their bodies pressed closely to one another, swaying in time with their singing. White shrouds are draped over their faces, obscuring their eyes and noses so Jack can only see their mouths. The song they sing is one he has never heard before, a hymn of the old ways written upon the walls, and their voices form a vacuous hum that drones on in his ears until he fears his head might pop. Mama Jeannie joins the circle, joins their mechanical swaying, and leaves him in the flickering shadows near the edge of the room. His father stands outside the circle, beyond a stone altar etched with the same bizarre symbols. A low droning hum erupts from the figure as he lifts his hands to the dark, offering praise to something Jack cannot see, but can feel. This unseen thing, this impossible something, it feels gigantic in his dream, a shapeless form that defies logic and wields its own gravity, a giant of dark matter, a self-contained void hanging above them all, lording over its congregation like the vastness of space. Jack can't bring himself to follow the direction of his father's praising hands. Shaking, Jack taps his grandmother's shoulder. "Please," he whispers. "I'm scared. Can we please go?" Imogene Trimley is annoyed, but her face softens when she sees the terror on his face. "Okay," she says. The congregation sings and sways while their pastor reaches for the unseen, a sentient cosmos deep within the earth. Before they ascend the ladder, Jack looks back at his father, a faceless man he will never understand and never love, a figure of fear and mystery that will haunt him into adulthood. Jacob Masters turns away from the void and casts a darkening gaze upon them. "Sister Tremley," he rasps, "where are you taking my son?" The reels swap one final time, the scene shifting from the dark of the cavern below to the golden sun-filled church above. Jack stands at the threshold, peering down the path along the side of Calvary Hill. Behind him, Mama Jeannie waits at the edge of the hole. She's panicked and afraid, and she beckons to her grandson. "Go," she tells him. "Run, Jackie, for God's sake, run!" And Jackie does as she commands, sprinting from the doorway and into the failing sunlight. Time has ceased to have meaning, the rules broken in this terrible dreamscape, and in the moments they spent underground an entire day has passed them by. The sun is setting, clouds rolling by overhead, obscuring the light and bleeding the world of warmth. Behind him, something is approaching, something dark, something wearing the face of his father and the skin of a man with terrible blue eyes. Something hidden, something horribly old. Jack runs as fast as his little legs will take him, but no matter how many times he dreams, no matter how far he pushes himself, he never outruns the thing lurking behind him. He never sees it, never gazes upon its vastness, only senses its size, a terrible dark wave seeping from the earth beneath the foundation of the old church. This impossibly formless thing, this unescapable void, it crashes over the threshold, spilling over everything in its wake, swallowing the world as it swallows minds and souls. The void licks at his heels, and he cries out in horror. It sweeps over him. Jack screams. There it is. So what do you think? Yeah, it's pretty fucked up dream, right? Sorry, Paula. So that's those are two sneak peeks at Devil's Creek, which is out on June 16th from Silver Shamrock Publishing. And provided this pandemic is, kind of burned its course, I guess, I will be doing some events, hopefully, unless they're canceled. I'm planning to be at Nikon in Massachusetts this year in July, and I'm planning to be at Scares That Care in Williamsburg, Virginia this August. Laurel Hightower says, "Can I please come rescue little Jack?" Well, you'll just have to read and find out, Laurel. I can't really say, he's fine. I mean, is he really? I don't know. I feel like I'm doing a book report or something. You gotta read the rest of the book if you want to find out. So, I'm gonna open this up for questions now. So, feel free to ask me anything. Anything at all. I'm here until you guys stop asking questions. So, it's hot in here. Anything, Tony. Anything. Hey, Czar. My cat, Czar, has come to say hello. Don't be surprised if you hear him yowling in a few minutes, because He's a big baby. He wants all the attention. Oh, what's on my shirt? This is a print of Thomas Ligotti. I got this from Grimscribe Press. They're the ones who publish the literary journal Vastarian, which is all about Thomas Ligotti. If anybody isn't familiar with Ligotti, I highly recommend you go check out his work. Very reclusive horror writer. He's being given the Lifetime Achievement Award this year at Stoker's. Well, he's supposed to, if the Stoker's ever happen. Yeah, definitely check out Grimscribe. They do good work. That's John Paget's press. John Paget's an author of The Secret of Ventriloquism. Fantastic collection. And he's also the guy who curates Thomas Ligotti online. He's probably one of the main reasons Thomas Ligotti is still talked about in horror circles, because Ligotti is, from what I understand, he's actually agoraphobic. Like, he does not go outside. So, yeah, he hasn't really published much lately. Again, very reclusive. So, but a fantastic writer. Tony Rapino asks, which is your favorite movie, Sleepaway Camp 2 or Sleepaway Camp 3? You son of a bitch. I'm gonna have to go with 2 because it's slightly less ridiculous than 3. I think, side note, it's an inside joke between Tony and I, because he made me go to the drive-in and watch like all three of the Sleepaway Camp films, and I can't get that time back. That being said, Felissa Rose is a really cool person, so props to Felissa Rose, even if those movies are awful. Yes, you made me. That's how it is. That's the truth. You say anything else, I'm going to say it's fake news and a hoax. Oh, Alan's here. Hey, Alan. Candy Corn is playing on Showtime. Okay. Thank you for the update. It is worth watching Sleepaway Camp for the ending, for sure. I will say, the first time I watched it on my own, I had no knowledge whatsoever of the film. So, yeah, that ending, I will give that ending as a 10 out of 10, just for pure shock value. William Castro asks, with the pandemic, do you think authors will stay away from the subject matter in their new books, or will it inspire plague-related fiction? Yeah, that's a good question. It's a great question. I think it's likely that we'll start seeing, plague fiction. I think we'll see it at some point. I think it'll rise up and be the hot item for 15 minutes. Good night, Paula. I'd say that it's probably going to rise to the top. It's probably going to be the hot topic for a lot of agents and editors to be looking for, just to capitalize on it, because that's what they do. That being said, how soon? I'd say it probably depends on how bad the body count is. I mean, I think about, not to say this is in any way a comparison, it's just the only thing that comes to mind at the moment is when so much content and art either got canceled or pulled or rescheduled or pushed back for years after 9/11 happened. because it happened to have something to do with an airplane or the World Trade Center or anything like that. So I think it'll happen. I just think it's too early to tell how big of a thing it will be. If this all blows over in a month or two and there's, hopefully nobody else dies from it, which unfortunately is unlikely, I think, the media will probably be a little bit more leery about picking up something that is too on the nose, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, no, I haven't seen the platform, Alan. Buzz from agents is they're already getting material about the subject. That's interesting. I don't plan on writing a pandemic story. It's not really something that interests me. I mean, that's not true. I mean, it does interest me. It's just that I feel like there have been so many more books that have been done so much better and said so much more than I ever could about that subject. I mean, looking at The Stand, looking at is it Swan Song by McCammon? Looking at, I mean, even Wanderers by Chuck Wendig. That's a fantastic book. So no, that's not a hint, Kenlin. Patrick Smith asks, the first of your books I purchased was Radio Free Nowhere. Oh man, thank you. That goes way back. Does Ash like country, top 40, or classic rock? She doesn't like any of them. She doesn't like any of them. Rich asks, what's one of the Venue short fiction or novels or both that it's like your white whale to work with? Oh, I know that one right away. That's Pseudopod. Pseudopod, the horror podcast. I have submitted to them so many times. I've lost count at this point. It's become a white whale for me because the first time I ever submitted to Pseudopod was back in 2007, 2008, I think, not long after they started. And I got rejected only because, and the editor wrote me an apology, actually. They rejected me because they had just accepted a story the week before with the same title and premise. So ever since then, I have been trying to crack that market, and it's only gotten harder because they've become a huge market in the time since. So, I don't know. I currently have something on submission with them right now, so fingers crossed. Maybe the 15th time is a charm. So, let's see. Todd, what is your favorite part of the writing process? Brainstorming a new idea, putting pen to paper, editing, or release day? Well, I kind of like brainstorming. I like the brainstorming aspect because I haven't committed to anything yet. The writing part is always... I have a love-hate relationship with the actual act of writing because on one hand it's very laborious. I mean, any writer will tell you it's hard work, and it's work you always do alone. And I think that's probably the one thing that goes underappreciated is anyone who, the muggles out there who had no concept of what it takes to write a book. This thing took me years of my life, but someone's going to pick it up and read it in a matter of hours and be like, all right, I'm done. But at the same time, I mean, if it's written well, then obviously that makes it for a faster read, I think. But I also enjoy it because it's this weird sort of magic that happens. Like, I'll sit down with an idea, and when everything's kind of firing on all cylinders, I have no idea where that's going to go. Like, I kind of know where I want it to go, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So, you know, the work aspect of it sucks, but at the same time, the exploration aspect of it doesn't. So, love, hate. Last question was from a conversation we had on Twitter way back in 2014. Oh my god. I'm sorry I don't remember. That was a long time ago. Wow, that kind of puts things in perspective. I didn't realize it had been that long since Radio Free Nowhere. Wow. Yes, Amelia. Writing is the worst. Alright. Any other questions? We've been going for about an hour and a half at this point. Anybody? Bueller? Bueller? Alright, if nobody's got any more questions, I'm going to wrap this up. It's 10:30 on a Friday night, and, you know, I'm not even going to answer that, Alan. Alan asked how many times I flushed today. Probably not enough. That's what I'll say. Amelia asked, well, she says there's been so much growth in your writing over the 15 years that I've known you. What do you think was the turning point? Honestly, getting away from the monochrome books for a while, I think, made a huge difference to me. I kind of felt trapped in that universe. I felt like I was stagnating because of that. There were so many things I wanted to do and try and write, and at the same, but I felt just, I was committed to this one project and I had to finish it, so I had to kind of give myself permission to step away from that. And with that came writing more short fiction, which became more practice. And, you know, I think if not that moment when I stepped away from the monochrome for a few years, if not that, then it would have to be coming back from Nikon in 2016 for the first time. And I think that was when I went back to an undeveloped story called The Final Reconciliation, and I cranked that out in about a month. And I haven't felt that energized. I hadn't felt that energized in a while. That first time at Nikon was the first time I ever actually felt like a real author. Just being around other authors and kind of being accepted as, you know, one of us. You know, that was a big thing for me. So, yeah, I'd say those two moments in my life were probably the biggest turning points. Yeah, I really honed my craft during the stories that became Ugly Little Things. That was all. Those were writing exercises I gave myself to kind of find the joy in it again, because the monochrome stories had really sucked the joy out of it for me. Pick a genre not that you write in that just gives you a simple pleasure to read in. You know, that's kind of hard to say, because I don't strictly read horror. I mean, I'm not even sure what you would classify it as. But I love the work of Haruki Murakami. The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle is a fantastic novel. Kafka on the Shore, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. There's another one. It's slipping my mind at the moment. I mean, don't get me wrong, I read a lot of horror. Not really a big sci-fi guy, not a fantasy guy. I used to be into fantasy when I was younger, um, but I kind of grew out of it. I could never get into the Wheel of Time or the Lord of the Rings. It just didn't grab me like horror did. I like thrillers. I like a good thriller novel, a good suspense novel. Uh, Older Dean Koontz, before he was kidnapped by Justin Bieber from the future and replaced. Did you let people know about your story being published in Vastarian? Well, Alan, you know that's true. Because Alan Rosinski is a poet who also goes to my writing group with the Mid-Atlantic Dark Fiction Society and the Pennsylvania chapter of the Horror Writers Association. So Vastarian was my first ever sale at professional rates. So that story, I believe, is coming out in the May issue of Vastarian. I think the spring issue got pushed back because of everything going on. But John Paget had posted and said that it's coming out in May, and my story is going to appear in that. It's called We've All Gone to the Magic Show. It's a Ligotti-inspired story. Really weird, really cerebral, but I'm really proud of it too. So, yeah, again, I think that's May. Vastarian, Grimscribe Press. Check it out. Can anything be done, authors, to influence Barnes & Noble to establish a horror section category? I hate going through all the racks. Man, me and you both. I miss Borders so much because Borders actually had a dedicated horror section. Barnes & Noble has dedicated sections for everything except fiction, which they just lump in as one section. That's not entirely true. They do have sections for mystery. They've got sections for sci-fi fantasy, which is usually where you find the horror stuff. But as far as like getting Barnes & Noble to do that, that's a mountain to climb, man. I mean, you got to think that all those spaces on the shelves for Barnes & Noble are driven by sales data. So, let's say that Devil's Creek, for example, gets picked up by my local Barnes & Noble because I'm in the area. It gets picked up by a Barnes & Noble or down in Kentucky because it's set in Kentucky. And, maybe they sell through their copies. If other people aren't coming in to express demand for it, to order it, you have to take into account that there's going to be somebody looking at, okay, we've had an uptick in sales for this particular title. It's currently not in stock. Let's get a few more titles there from the publisher, and we'll go from there. And that's usually the way it goes. And typically, another thing to keep in mind is that if they don't sell through it, then they're going to reclaim it. And anybody who works in supply chain or anything like that will know what that means. But when they reclaim it, it basically means that whatever books they haven't sold and can't sell, they withhold the right to return that to the vendor, the publisher, for the cost that they paid for it, plus the cost of shipping it. And that's why print on demand is such a huge thing for smaller booksellers, and smaller publishers, because they're not having to warehouse, thousands of copies of books that may not sell. There's less risk involved. But also the trade-off is that the book tends to be a little bit more expensive because it's not being mass-produced. So, well, have a good night, Laurel. Thanks for joining. So getting Barnes & Noble to actually have a horror section would mean across the board. I think that would mean a drastic sea change for horror in general, worldwide. And for as much of an uptick in horror that we've seen in recent years, I don't think we're there yet. That's my personal opinion. So, yeah, Murakami's 1Q84, I never finished. I couldn't get into it. I think I had kind of grown beyond Murakami at that point when that came out. Yeah, Kindle, I hope it gets picked up in Kentucky. I definitely am going to push for Joseph Beth Booksellers in Lexington to pick it up. And also possibly Books A Million in Corbin. For the folks who are watching or don't know, Stafford, Kentucky is based on my hometown of Corbin, Kentucky. So I don't know if it'll actually be picked up there or not, because I don't exactly paint the town in the best light. And that's an understatement of the century, I'd say. So I don't see any more questions coming up. Alright, I will take a couple more if you guys got them. If not, it's 20 to 11, and I can go binge watch something in front of the TV for a couple hours before I pass out. So, going once, going twice. Thank you, Amelia. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Really, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy Friday night, sitting at home, doing nothing, to watch me read some of my fiction. I really appreciate it, and you can still share this link with your friends, because what we're doing now is going to be recorded. So it should be on YouTube within a few minutes after we're done. And that's all I got. So thank you very much, and I'm sure I'll be doing this again soon. So especially if I can't go outside or anything to do events. So have a good night, everybody, and a great weekend. Be safe, and wash your goddamn hands.